In the final days of World War II, the crew of the USS Indianapolis faced a harrowing choice: burn on their sinking ship or brave the shark-infested waters of the Pacific. With flames raging, time is running out. Their decision is a matter of life or death. This is the story of the USS Indianapolis and the extraordinary timeline of events that unfolded in the treacherous waters. The USS Indianapolis had been the flagship during the tenure of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. But in July 1945, the 610-foot-long heavy cruiser would become pivotal in ending World War II, at great peril to hundreds of sailors stationed on her. On July 15th, the Indy received orders to collect classified cargo in San Francisco. What no one knew was that the first successful nuclear test had happened mere hours earlier, ushering in the atomic age. In the dead of night, the Indianapolis anchored in Hunters Point Navy Shipyard, where two officers boarded the vessel, carrying two canisters, about 3 feet by 4 feet tall, which they welded to the deck. The cargo was shrouded in mystery, so much so that even the personnel assigned to guard it round the clock were oblivious. Before leaving the port, Ship Captain Charles McVeigh told the crew they were on a top-secret mission, and he could not divulge what it was. He did, however, tell them that should there be orders to abandon ship during the voyage, the cargo was to be placed on a lifeboat before anyone else. After refueling at Pearl Harbor, the crew made a straight run to Tinian at the cruiser's top speed of about 25 knots. The team was already on high alert and told that every day shaved off their journey would be a day closer to ending the war. The 5,000-mile journey from San Francisco to Tinian Island in the Pacific, one of the busiest airfields during the war, took just 10 days. From this strategic position, bombers were readily dispatched to strike Japan. It would subsequently come to light that the clandestine cargo contained parts for Little Boy, the atomic bomb that would level the Japanese city of Hiroshima just a few days later on August 6th. After a stopover in Guam, the Indy was set to sail to the Leyte Gulf to undergo 2 weeks of training before joining the Naval Task Force at Okinawa for the anticipated invasion of Honshu in November 1945. The Indianapolis lacked sonar to detect submarines, prompting the captain's request for an escort vessel, but his request was denied, leaving the ship and its crew exposed to the lurking danger. The decision wasn't thought to be unusual, as the ship was a fast cruiser that had traveled unescorted previously. Additionally, it was thought that the area posed minimal danger, and escort vessels were scarce at the time due to heavy kamikaze attacks and preparations for the invasion of Japan. It was a decision that would ultimately cost hundreds of lives. Shortly after midnight on July 30th, disaster struck when a Japanese submarine, I-58, spotted the Indy. The cruiser was headed toward the submarine, leading Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto to believe that she was in fact a destroyer or battleship. He waited until the vessel was about 1,500 yards away, then fired a tirade of 6 torpedoes toward the ship. Each torpedo carried a 1,210-pound explosive charge. The first torpedo caused a massive explosion, blasting the ship's bow clear out of the water and igniting the fuel tank, leading to a towering inferno. As fires raged below, the top-heavy ship began listing onto its side. Seconds later, another torpedo followed, hitting crew's berthing areas and igniting the powder magazines, causing a series of blasts that tore the ship apart, knocking out the vessel's communications. Several secondary explosions followed, resounding enough to make the submarine's crew believe they were being depth-charged. In an instant, the blast claimed the lives of a quarter of its crew when it struck the sleeping quarters, with more than 300 men dying as the burning vessel took on water. In just 12 minutes, the vessel, the length of 2 football fields, disappeared under the water. About 900 men of the original crew of 1,195 were left struggling, stranded, and helpless in the dark waters. But surviving the submarine attack was only the start of their ordeal. As the cruiser sank, the men found themselves surrounded by thick fuel oil, burning their eyes and choking their throats. The sea was merciless, with 12-foot swells making it impossible to escape the slick area. Violent retching and the nauseating taste of oil filled their mouths as the reality of their predicament set in. As day broke, the survivors found themselves adrift in the water. Only half had life jackets, and only 12 lifeboats and some floater nets had been deployed in time. Dawn brought some hope, but the toll of the first night was evident. They welcomed the sun's rays after the cold chill of the hours before. But soon, as temperatures at sea soared to well over 110 degrees Fahrenheit, dehydration and fatigue set in. The sun's reflection on the fuel oil intensified their suffering, causing photophobia and unbearable heat. As their day went on, a new threat emerged. Sharks, lurking in the waters and attacking anyone who strayed. In the first night, survivors say sharks focused mainly on the floating dead, but soon they were attracted to the motions and blood of the living. The men were, however, confident they'd be saved before the day ended. They reasoned that even if their distress signal had failed, the ship was due at Leyte by 11 that morning. If it didn't arrive on time, a search party would surely be dispatched to look for them. The bleak reality was that no one was searching for the crew, as the Navy had failed to realize the Indy was in fact missing. The ship was not operating on a fixed schedule, and its movements were classified at the time. The ship's failure to arrive at its destination was also not reported to the relevant authorities, creating confusion as to whether the vessel had been delayed or simply rerouted. Survivors say they spotted at least 8 U.S. aircraft flying directly over them through their ordeal. But pilots were flying blind, meaning they relied on instruments rather than eyesight and didn't notice the frantic men in the water below. Reports indicate that Navy intelligence had intercepted a message from the Japanese submarine describing the sinking of a U.S. battleship along the same route. But sadly, the message was disregarded as a ploy to lure rescue ships into an open-water battlefield. By Tuesday, July 31st, the men's hopes started fading as they struggled to survive exposure, thirst, and worst of all, the sharks. The sound of the explosion and the sinking ship had drawn the predators in, and the oceanic white-tipped sharks in particular proved to be vicious attackers. The men tried to protect themselves, avoiding anyone with an open wound and even sacrificing the dead to distract predators from the living. The sharks would attack every morning, hover around the wounded and dying throughout the day, and prey on the living again at night.
The first couple of days, those guys never lasted very long.
So it was all the time, day and night, the sharks were there?
Yeah, they're never gone. But they weren't always attacking. You could look down and see them swarming.
Amidst the chaos and devastation, the deadly challenges mounted. Some were swallowed by the thick black oil spewed up from the ship's engines, while others succumbed to the scorching sun and drank seawater contaminated with salt, leading to dehydration and hypernatremia. Mass hallucinations and delirium plagued the men constantly and led to even more deaths. A fortunate few had managed to scavenge some sustenance from the wreckage, such as crackers and Spam, but the scent of meat attracted more sharks, compelling them to abandon their hard-won food. The torturous screams became more common as the sharks grew more aggressive. It's believed they killed about 150 men. After 3 days of drifting at sea, the group of survivors had become smaller, and some lost all hope of ever being rescued. The overwhelming sense of desperation and fatigue eventually drove some men to take their own lives. But a stroke of pure luck would eventually lead to a rescue. On the morning, surviving sailors and Marines were spotted by a U.S. Navy patrol bomber pilot who had noticed an oil slick while adjusting an antenna. The pilot, suspecting an enemy submarine, swiftly turned the plane and prepared for action. As he descended, he spotted the men waving and splashing in the water. Survivors clung to whatever strength they had left, knowing that their ordeal at sea was coming to an end. But it would take another 24 hours for naval vessels to arrive and retrieve the survivors. Tragically, many did not make it through those final hours. After enduring 110 hours of fighting for their lives, the remaining survivors were finally rescued. Searchlights pierced the darkness as vessels combed the area, retrieving the blind, injured and severely dehydrated crew. The rescue ship quite literally became a beacon of hope, offering salvation to the 316 survivors who had clung to life against all odds. Only 2 days after the rescue operation, the world changed forever as Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima. The haunting message, "This one is for the boys of the Indianapolis," was written on the side, a chilling reminder of the tragedy and sacrifice of the crews of the Indy. But for one of them, Ship Captain Charles McVeigh, another battle for survival awaited. He became the only captain in U.S. naval history to be court-martialed for the loss of his ship during combat. The Navy had initially charged McVeigh with 2 counts: negligence for not zigzagging to avoid enemy submarines at night, and for allegedly delaying the issuance of abandoned ship orders after the torpedo struck. In a dramatic and controversial move, the prosecution summoned Commander Hashimoto to strengthen their case that the Indy was not engaging in zigzagging maneuvers. But this move did not play out in their favor. To their dismay, Hashimoto's testimony indicated that the Indianapolis would have sunk regardless of whether it zigzagged or not. McVeigh was ultimately only charged with negligence in the loss of the ship. Despite being restored to active duty and retiring as a rear admiral, the guilt of the ship's loss continued to haunt him. In 1968, McVeigh took his own life, using his Navy revolver on his front lawn, holding a toy sailor. After decades of campaigning by surviving crew members, McVeigh was finally exonerated in 2000, more than 50 years after the sinking. The wreck of the Indy was only discovered in August 2017, more than 18,000 feet below the ocean surface, making it one of the deepest shipwrecks ever to be successfully located. The discovery of the wreck brought closure to one of the most significant losses of life at sea in the history of the U.S. Navy. However, since it is designated as a war grave, the USS Indy will remain where she is, undisturbed at the bottom of the ocean. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.